Hey everybody, my name is Spaz and I am a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I am going to discuss an artist that remains completely underappreciated to this very day. His name is Adam Ant. Now, a lot of you are saying, wait a minute, I know Goody Two Shoes, or I know Strip, or I know Puss in Boots, and a lot of you are going to know Adam and the Ant songs like Stand and Deliver or Dog Eat Dog. But what people really don't realize is the fact that every single Adam Ant album is completely different from the one that came before and the one that came after. He is a musical chameleon. He remains purely Adam Ant. You can tell it's Adam Ant, but stylistically, every album is different. And I'm going to go through his catalog here as quick as possible and remind you of just what a great artist he was, is, and will always be. He has a great back catalog, by the way. Now, a lot of the stuff I'm going to feature here are the remasters. So the covers might look slightly different than maybe the LPs you own, or maybe the CDs you own if you didn't get the remasters. But we're going to start with Dirk Wears White Socks. This was the very first Adam and the Ants album. This is very different from what came after. This is not a pop-oriented album. This is very post-punk, dark, gloomy. Some people have compared it to goth. It's not really goth. It's just not as melodic as the stuff that came later, but it is very interesting. He has a unique musical vision, and the songs are herky-jerky, and there's some great songs like Catholic Day, and during this period, during the early period, there was Xerox and Kick and things like that, and Ligatage, but this was the first album, and this version here has bonus tracks, if any of you want to take a look at that. It's not the Adam Ant, if you're looking for the commercial stuff, this is not the commercial stuff, but it's a fascinating glimpse into the artist that he was, and then you'll be able to see him morph into the artist that he became. Now, in the US, the album was released after his success, and that's what the album cover looked like there. They sort of tried to make it look like the same style as his next album, which I'm going to discuss now. But what I wanted to mention is that in his early days, I think it was like probably 78, 79, a couple of the members left the band, and they eventually went off and formed Monochrome Set. And then after this period, Malcolm McLaren took over managing Adam, and he was going to turn him into this big pop star. And he introduced the band to these tribal Burundi rhythms, and the band was really getting into it. But what Malcolm did is he kicked Adam out of Adam and the Ants, and he took the remaining ants, added a vocalist named Annabella Lewin, and created Bow Wow Wow. So, in case you didn't know, some of the players on this album ended up in Bow Wow Wow. But Adam formed a new band. He hired Marco Perroni, a guitar player, who'd been in various bands, like I think maybe the Models, not the Australian band. He was also in the very first live performance of Susie and the Banshees with Sid Vicious on drums. So anyway, Marco Perroni joins up with Adam Ant, and they start writing these great songs and combining their love of rock and roll, classic rock and roll, like the Gene Vincents of the world and Eddie Cochrans and stuff. They took the Burundi rhythms that Malcolm McLaren had introduced him to, and they created this slice of love, Kings of the Wild Frontier. I'll tell you, I'd never heard Adam and the Ants until this album came out. I read a lot about him, and I went and I bought this album, and I hated it. Sold it to my friend Chuck Reddick. You take it, Chuck. Chuck fell in love with it. After about a week or so, I went back to Licorice Pizza, the record store, and I plunked down another $3.99 plus tax. I think it was $4.23 total, and bought Kings of the Wild Frontier again. And I tell you, that time I hated it too. Couldn't stand it. Sold it to another friend. Then maybe about 2 weeks later, I went back, and the third time was the charm, because that sucker clicked immediately. When I put the needle down, I fell in love with it, and it is just a fantastic album. This is the album with Ant Music, with Dog Eat Dog, Los Rancheros, Magnificent Five. They took sort of the ghosts of rock and roll history, you know, the Eddie Cochrans, the Elvises and stuff, and they just turned it upside down, put it in a blender, added African rhythms, and came out with a sound that was completely unique and has never been duplicated. They didn't even duplicate it. But Kings of the Wild Frontier, this is the version, the initial remaster with some bonus material, but recently it's come out as the deluxe edition, so you get a whole lot more there. So Kings of the Wild Frontier, very fine album. This made them huge stars. They were just enormously successful in the UK. But then comes a single by the name of Stand and Deliver. Took that sound from the first album, but changed it a little bit, maybe toned down the tribal rhythms, and it was an amazing song. And then they followed up with an album that was even more different than that, Prince Charming. Now, a lot of people immediately, when they saw this album cover, they go, oh dear. But Prince Charming is an absolutely wonderful album. Is it Kings of the Wild Frontier? No, it's not. It's a completely different beast. This has some amazing songs on it. I admit that maybe they were trying for something a little bit too different, and some of the songs didn't quite click, but it was still a wonderful record. I wonder if it has a picture of the band on the inside here. Yep, there you go, right there. There's Adam and the Ants. This gentleman here is Gary Tibbs. He is best known for his work with Roxy Music and Code Blue and lots of other bands. But Adam and the Ants, sadly, this was the last album by Adam and the Ants, because he released a single a little while after this album called Goody Two Shoes, and it was originally attributed to Adam and the Ants. In fact, it was produced by Chris Hughes, who was the drummer for Adam and the Ants, and he had produced some of their other stuff. The Goody Two Shoes single was reissued and put out under the Adam Ant name, and it was the precursor to this album, Friend or Foe. This is a wonderful pop album, completely different than what came before, but still very much Adam. Very melodic, a lot of great songs on here. The hits on this, of course, would be Desperate But Not Serious, Goody Two Shoes, Friend or Foe. There's a lot of great songs on this record. It's more of a straightforward pop album, but it's just strictly Adam. There's nobody that sounded like him. He wasn't trying to sound like anybody else. He, on this record, on Prince Charming, he may have looked like he was going to be part of the new romantic movement, but musically, no, not even close. Same thing with this. He was doing something different that nobody else was doing. You take something like Goody Two Shoes and compare it to whatever else came out that year, and there's nothing like it. It's still based in that rock and roll, because you'll notice like the last chords of Goody Two Shoes is the opening chords to Jailhouse Rock. So they were still taking the core of rock and roll and turning it into something poppy, a little fluffier, a little glossier, but still amazing. This has bonus tracks, as you could tell. Now, the success of this earned him a lot of hit singles and accolades all over the world. And then came an album by the name of Strip. Now, this album here, there were a couple songs produced by Phil Collins, including the title track and Puss in Boots, which were the big singles off of this album. But this album was, again, different than Friend or Foe. It was a lot more slick, electronic, wasn't as engaging, but it still got some great songs on it. In fact, Playboy is just a wonderful song. Adam is very strange. He looks at music from a different angle, and he takes all these great bits and pieces of rock and roll and just forms them into weird shapes and melodies and stuff. And this is no different. It's not a great record by any means, but it is still a great addition to his catalog, because there are enough songs on here that make it worthwhile. Baby Let Me Scream at You, weirder than weird, but just melodic and wonderful. And after this, then came his T-Rex album. Well, that's what I call it. Viva La Rock is his very rock and roll glam album. He's got Bogdan Vichling from Fingerprints on drums. He's got Chris De Niro on bass. He's got Marco Perrone on guitar. And this is produced by Tony Visconti. It's very glam rock and roll, but then when you listen to Plan 9 or Viva La Rock, you're going, where the hell's this guy coming from? But he's coming from the greatest place, because he's coming from Adamantville, and nobody else lives there except him musically, and it's fantastic. Now, this was, of course, his last album for quite a while. Most of his stuff was released through like subsidiaries of Columbia or Sony, like Columbia and stuff like that. So in the meantime, as we all waited for new Adamant music to emerge, and Sony didn't own the rights to anything after that, they would start putting out compilations. B-Side Babies is a great collection because it has rarities, B-sides, things that I think only appeared maybe on cassette versions. And, you can also track down any of the best ofs. What I want to point out, which I didn't point out earlier, is if you listen to the single version of Stand and Deliver, it's a different mix than the album version. And same recording, different mix. So the single has all the instrumentation down the center, and on the outside you get the voices, in stereo, where the album mix actually does the opposite. You hear the rhythms, like the Burundi drums and stuff on the outside, and the vocals are sort of folded into the center. That's like nerd music geek talking. But you can buy any of the Adamant best ofs, and they'll be worth your while. After Adam's contract with Columbia expired, he tried his hand at acting. He became a face in Hollywood, dated starlets and all that stuff. So it took him a while to get back into music. But when he came back, he still had Marco co-writing songs, and he came back with the Manners and Physique album. The album was produced by former Prince protege, bandmate, Andre Simone. You think to yourself, oh, I don't want to hear Adamant sounding like Prince, but it doesn't. It just takes what Adam was doing and adds this cool modern, then modern rhythm. And this is, of course, the Cherry Pop expanded edition. But it's got Room at the Top. There's a lot of great songs. Marco's guitar is present and accounted for. And it's a great pop album, and completely unlike what you would expect if you were thinking this sounded like Prince. Anyway, he recorded another album for MCA, because this album originally came out on MCA. He recorded another album, remains unreleased to this day. He disappeared again for a little while. He came back in about 94 or so and put out the Wonderful album, which is wonderful. Still with Marco. He's also got Boz Borer, who was with the Polecats and has been working with Morrissey. And this is just a great record. It's completely different than anything else that's come before, but it's got enchanting and beautiful things, like the song Wonderful is really touching, and then it's got sort of a couple naughty songs. Like, he's always known for adding naughty songs into his catalog, but this is actually a fantastic, great, Beautiful Dreams, a great song. And if you passed over Adam and thought that his best days were behind him, you were completely wrong. Wonderful is a great album. It's a great pop album. Then it took him another 18, 20 years to put out a new album, and this one is Adamant is the blue-black hussar in Marrying the Gunner's Daughter. No, I have no clue what that title means. But this is Adam back recording music. He doesn't have Marco with him anymore. This is the first album without Marco. And it's a strange record. It embraces the ethic of his early post-punk years, but then adds a little bit of the Viva La Rock vibe on one song, a little bit of the Kings of the Royal Frontier vibe on another song, a little bit of the Wonderful vibe on another song. It's like all over the map. Instead of just focusing on one style, there's a whole lot happening on this album. Here's the track list. Cool Zombie was like the first single, and that harkens back to maybe modern meets Friend or Foe period. But again, it's such a different sounding album that you really need to hear it to experience it. And he's toured, and he's looks like he's wearing the clothes of old, but it's a new sound for him. Again, Every album is a new sound for Adam Ant. And that is it. This is 6 years have passed since this album came out, and he's toured and he's done, hits tours and stuff, but he hasn't put out any new music. What he needs to do is he needs to get back with Marco and put out an album that's just going to lay everybody flat, blow everybody away, and remind people of the star that he was and should always be. So anyway, that's it for my look back at Adam Ant. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope maybe that inspires you to go back and maybe listen to an album or two and maybe get motivated to revisit Planet Adam. Until then, this is Spaz, and I'm a CD junkie. Smell you later.